In 1981, the Nobel Prize in Medicine was awarded to neuropsychologist Roger Sperry, who proved that if you sever the corpus callosum connecting the two hemispheres of the brain, two completely independent conscious entities emerge within a single skull. They develop different desires, different beliefs, and one hand can literally snatch objects from the other. Your sense of a unified personality disintegrates with one precise scalpel incision. In 2008, an experiment at the Max Planck Institute showed that neural networks formulate a decision in an information vacuum 7 to 10 seconds before you are even aware of it. Your body acts, and the very feeling that you personally made this decision is generated by the brain after the fact, like a beautiful special effect. That very I that supposedly controls your life is a neurobiological illusion, a system commentator who is always late. And finally, mathematics. The interface theory of perception, proven by cognitive scientist Donald Hoffman using evolutionary game theory, states, the probability that you are seeing objective reality right now is exactly zero. The physical world around you is a controlled hallucination that your brain continuously constructs in real time. Human perception is tuned for survival, not for truth. Here, an unsolvable paradox is born. If each of the 8 billion people generates their own personal, isolated hologram of reality, why are our holograms perfectly synchronized? If every brain has its own self-generated world, why do we all agree on the shapes, distances, and density of matter? Out of this problem was born the concept of solipsism, the idea that only your personal perceiving I exists and everything else, including other people, has no point of view of its own and exists merely as an appearance generated specifically for you. But this concept shatters against the millennia-old truth of non-duality. The illusion is not only the surrounding world, but also the separate observer itself. Your brain constructs the feeling of a separate I in the exact same way it constructs the color of an apple or the sound of the wind. At a fundamental level, both the world and the one observing it are inseparable elements of a single continuous process. If reality is truly one, and you as a separate entity never existed, then who are other people? Are we all just dreaming each other, forming a shared, coordinated illusion? Or is the truth that this world is not limited by your mind at all? Next, we will dismantle the paradox of a shared reality. To do this, we'll have to take apart the one who is looking at it right now. Since childhood, you have lived with an unshakable feeling. It seems to you that somewhere in there, right behind your eyes, sits a little passenger who controls the body, hears sounds, makes decisions, and calls themselves by your name. But even modern neuroscience proves a simple fact. There is no single command center in the brain. If you put a person in an MRI scanner and ask them to think about themselves, about their plans, fears, or memories, a specific architecture of neurons lights up. It is called the default mode network. This is not the vault of your soul. It is a limiting valve. It intercepts thoughts and continuously glues them together into a unified illusion, a story about who you are. The brain is not a factory that manufactures consciousness out of a piece of flesh. It is a receiver, a quantum antenna. The main task of the brain is not to show you the truth, but to hide it. It works as a filter. It cuts off 99% of information, and from the remaining crumbs, it pieces together not only a 3D model of the room around you, it pieces together the very idea of me. But if the activity of this network is suppressed through deep meditation or certain chemical compounds, something astonishing happens. The feeling that you are a separate person disappears completely, yet consciousness itself does not turn off. On the contrary, it becomes crystal clear. When the interface of the personality is unplugged, only the process of life itself remains, without anyone living it. Try to find this separate I right now. Look inside yourself. You will find thoughts. You will find a pulse, a feeling of tension in your head or breath in your chest. But you will not find the one who is looking at all of this, because all these sensations, including the very thought I exist, are just objects. Objects just like cars passing by. They flash in an empty, boundless space of awareness and vanish. British philosopher Tony Parsons, who experienced a total collapse of this illusion during a simple walk, describes it like this: enlightenment is not something that happens to someone. It is the realization that there is no one here. There is no one to wake up and no one to live. There is only life itself, which right now is pretending to be you. The feeling of a separate I is not your soul. It is simply a geolocation program, an interface created solely so that this specific biological avatar could survive, defend its boundaries, and reproduce in an illusory material world. But if there is no master inside this avatar and the whole world around is just a projection of the brain, a question arises. What exactly are our minds connected to if billions of empty biological avatars see the exact same world? Take a look at any multiplayer online game. Inside it, you see elves, mountains, and castles. You can walk up to the exact same virtual tree and hit it with a sword simultaneously. You all see the same tree. Does this tree exist physically? No. Inside your computers, there is neither bark nor leaves. There is only a unified server, a central database that stores immaterial information code. You and your friends see the same world not because it consists of solid matter. You see it as the same because your devices are connected to a single server and use the same operating system to decode the data. In our reality, this server is the unified field, infinite consciousness, the source, and your biological bodies are those very decoding devices. Because all humans have a practically identical genetic code, our sensory hardware unpacks the data of the universe using the exact same algorithm. We see the same moon because we use identical biological drivers. If you were to look at this exact same information file through the eyes of a snake or a bat, the moon would look completely different. But if all this is just code being broadcast into billions of receivers and only one consciousness exists, then do my child, my enemy, and the random passerby exist separately from me? Or is this entire multiplicity of faces just an illusion? Both are true. This multiplicity is the greatest illusion, but at the same time, they are absolutely real, just in a completely different way than you are used to thinking. Philosopher Bernardo Kastrup offers a brilliant explanation of how a unified consciousness can become a multitude of different people without actually dividing into pieces. Imagine an infinite ocean. The water in it flows freely, but sometimes, in different parts of the ocean, the water swirls into whirlpools. A whirlpool has a clear boundary. It has a shape. It seems like a separate object that exists on its own. You might say, look, here is a whirlpool, and here is the ocean. But can you take the whirlpool out of the ocean? No, because the whirlpool is not a separate object. It is simply a behavior of the water itself. There is nothing in the whirlpool except water. Every person on this planet is such a whirlpool, a localization of the unified consciousness. You have your own thoughts, your own traumas, and your own unique memories. This information swirls within your boundary. The person next to you is their own whirlpool, with their own problems. You appear to each other as separate people. But what are you made of? Of the exact same water, of the exact same pure awareness. Why did the one need to swirl into billions of different vortices? Because without this, there would be absolutely nothing. In order for the unified consciousness to experience, to feel love, to experience fear, to play the game of evolution, it needed the illusion of multiplicity, the illusion of separation, to shatter itself into myriads of fragments, each of which would forget who it truly is. Our mind righteously protests. If all this is the game of the one, then this source is a cruel sadist. Why did it create a world containing wars, diseases, violence, and so much human pain? The mistake is that we once again imagine the source as an external creator sitting on a cloud, torturing others for entertainment. But the truth is, there are no others here. Recall your most terrifying nightmare. The horrific monster chasing you and the terrified victim are the exact same sleeping mind of yours. No one is torturing anyone from the outside. In the world of forms, it is impossible to create only light. Any experience in a dualistic world requires contrast, otherwise it won't be recognized as an experience. To paint a picture, you need deep shadows, otherwise there will be no picture. Without the bitter, we would never recognize the sweet, and without destruction, there would be no creation. The ocean does not feel pain when two of its waves crash into each other. Pain is only felt by the whirlpool that is identified so strongly with its shape that it believes it can shatter or die. Other people exist within the framework of this illusion. They have their own bodies, their own memories, and their own pain. But on a fundamental level, they are not strangers. Looking into the eyes of a random passerby, you are literally looking at yourself, just grown in different conditions with a different set of genes and traumas. The difference between you is only in the content of the experience. But that silent presence, which right now is looking at the world from their eyes, is absolutely identical to the presence looking from yours. And this illusion can be broken physically. What happens to people in that moment, science still calls an anomaly. We call it awakening. For a long time, it was believed that enlightenment was a metaphorical, purely spiritual experience, something from the realm of esotericism. But modern neuroscientists show that awakening leaves a physical trace that can be observed on MRI scans. Materialistic science was built for decades on a simple and logical axiom: the brain generates consciousness, exactly the same way a projector generates an image. Therefore, if you reduce the activity of the processor, the picture should dim, shrink, and fade away. But when scientists placed masters of deep meditation and people experiencing total ego dissolution into MRI scanners, they discovered something astonishing. The activity of their brains, especially the areas responsible for self-identification, dropped to almost zero. Yet consciousness did not dim. On the contrary, it exploded with incredible clarity, became all-encompassing, and transcended the bounds of space and time. People described it as merging with the one source. You cannot get an 8K resolution picture by smashing half the processor in your TV. How can a reduction in computational power lead to such a grandiose expansion of consciousness? The answer is simple. The brain does not produce consciousness, it limits it. We have already mentioned the default mode network. It is the biological center of our ego. Returning to Bernardo Kastrup's metaphor, the default mode network acts as the very walls of the whirlpool that make the water believe it is separate from the ocean. The brain works as an evolutionary filter. Consciousness contains all the information of the universe simultaneously, but it is impossible to survive with such a volume of data in the physical world. You wouldn't be able to cross the street if you felt oneness with every single atom of the asphalt. Therefore, the brain puts a VR headset on you, cutting off 99.9% of reality so that the little biological avatar can survive. When you turn down this valve in meditation, the flow of the unified consciousness is not created by the brain. It finally breaks through it. Your mind will inevitably object. Hold on, what if you give a person general anesthesia and completely shut down the brain? Consciousness just vanishes into nothingness. Doesn't this prove that I am the brain? It's an excellent question which conceals a trap of the mind. It confuses consciousness with objects and the apparatus of memory. In deep meditation, your limiter is turned off, but your biological recording device continues to work. It records this experience of boundlessness so that later you can talk about it. Anesthesia does something else entirely. It unplugs the entire interface of the avatar from the wall. It completely powers down the reality rendering mechanism. Imagine you are playing an incredibly realistic VR game. Suddenly, the anesthesiologist unplugs the cord of your headset from the outlet. The virtual forest, the sounds, the very time and space of the game vanish instantly. Does this forest exist without you? No, the game is off. But did you disappear, the one wearing this headset? No, you simply found yourself outside the simulation, in total peace, where there are no forms, no time, and no boundaries. But our mind needs objects in order to record a memory. When you wake up after anesthesia, the mind consults the memory, finds not a single recorded file there, not a single anchor to time, and makes a false conclusion. There was a void there. I didn't exist. But it wasn't that you didn't exist. You simply didn't exist as a separate character inside the game. You were in a state of pure being, which your avatar is simply incapable of recording. Take Gary Weber. He is not a world-renouncing hermit, but a PhD, a physicist, and a materialist. Gary meditated for many years, simply trying to reduce stress. And then one morning, while he was doing his usual stretching, the voice in his head just turned off. Forever. His internal monologue vanished. Gary underwent an fMRI scan at Yale University. The results showed that his default mode network, that very ego zone, was practically deactivated. At the same time, he retained a brilliant mind, continued to manage laboratories, and wrote scientific papers. It's just that the Whirlpool was no longer there. Only the pure ocean of perception remained. But sometimes, you don't even need practices for the system to glitch. Sometimes it happens as a result of an extreme biological shock. John Wren Lewis was a British mathematician and scientist, completely far removed from spiritual pursuits. In 1983, while traveling in Thailand, he ate a poisoned candy offered by a mugger and fell into a deep coma. When doctors pulled him back from the brink of death, John opened his eyes and realized that the old him was no more. He described it like this: the feeling of separateness had disappeared. He was no longer looking at the world from inside his skull. He felt like an infinite shining space in which the hospital, the doctors, and his own body were floating. John lived in a state of continuous bliss for the rest of his life, trying to scientifically explain what had happened to him. Or the phenomenon of U.G. Krishnamurti, who called his awakening a calamity. He claimed it was a purely physiological mutation, during which the very illusion of a command center collapsed. The fictional owner, who always claimed the body's actions as his own, simply shut down. The receptors started working directly. Eyes saw, ears heard, the body acted, but inside there was no longer a commentator who would claim this for himself. Thoughts only arose in him as a reflex reaction to an external stimulus. But as soon as the stimulus disappeared, a complete physiological silence set in. A logical question arises. If my I does not exist, and the brain is merely a limiting filter, then who is trying to comprehend these words right now? A little biological bio-robot, or infinite consciousness itself. The paradox is that infinite consciousness itself is trying to comprehend this right now, having gotten so caught up playing in its own virtual reality that it sincerely believed it is you. It is not the brain that is looking, it is the one looking, temporarily gazing upon this world through the narrow keyhole of your personality. When words are spoken about the physical world being a hologram, a simulation, or the dream of a unified consciousness, any self-respecting materialist will inevitably ask the exact same snarky question. If all this is just an illusion and matter doesn't exist, why don't you go out on the highway and step in front of a truck? This argument usually confuses the meaning of the words illusory and unreal. An illusion does not mean that a thing does not exist at all. An illusion means that a thing is not what it appears to be. Remember Donald Hoffman's interface theory. You look at your computer screen and see a blue square folder. Does it exist? Yes. You can click on it, you can drag it. But is it actually a blue square? No. At a fundamental level, it's just magnetic fields on a hard drive and zipping electrons. The icon is an illusion, a metaphor created for your convenience. But if you take this illusory icon and drag it into the illusory trash bin, you might lose weeks of perfectly real work. The rules of the interface are absolute and uncompromising for those who are inside that interface. Your physical body is exactly the same kind of interface, a biological avatar. It is woven from the very same quantum code as the truck speeding towards you. If one element of the code collides with another at high speed inside the simulation, the avatar will be damaged or deleted. The pain you will experience in the process is not proof that the world consists of solid matter. Pain is simply a flawlessly functioning signal from the security system of your VR headset. It is the scream of the evolutionary filter. Don't do this. You will break the decoding device. You, as infinite consciousness, will not suffer at all from the impact of a bumper. The ocean couldn't care less what happens to the water, but this specific whirlpool with your name on it will be destroyed, and the broadcast of the universe through this unique keyhole will be interrupted. Reality is a non-physical game, but it has strict laws, and as long as your consciousness is tethered to a biological avatar, you are obliged to obey the rules of its level. That is why awakened masters do not jump off roofs and do not step in front of cars. They cross the road on a green light, pay taxes, and take care of their bodies. The only difference is that they know they are not this fragile little figure. They are the very space in which this game unfolds. And this brings us to the most important point. If the brain is merely a receiver and personality is just a temporarily running program, what does that change? Actually, everything. All anxiety, all pain, and human suffering hang precisely on a single thought. On the blind belief that you are a small, separate fragment of the universe that was born one day, which must constantly survive and defend itself against a vast, hostile world. The fear of death exists only because there is an absolute conviction, I can die. But the paradox is that the character cannot die because it was never alive to begin with. And that which you truly are was never born, therefore it cannot disappear. When the biological interface exhausts its resources, no tragedy will occur. Space will not collapse. The film will simply end. The whirlpool will just quietly dissolve, becoming the smooth surface of the ocean once again. And if you have watched up to this moment, it might seem to you that you have grasped the essence. You have understood the mechanics of reality. Perhaps you are thinking, I get it. I am the unified consciousness. But the thing is, any state, even the most elevated feeling of connection with the universe, deep emptiness, or the dissolution of the I is still just a state. It is an experience. It is a result. Attempting to comprehend the absence of mind with the mind is like watching a movie on a screen and trying to use the characters in that movie to explain how the projector works. It is a vicious circle. The system uses itself to explain itself. The ego simply puts on the mask of an enlightened observer who is now enjoying the concept of non-existence. Therefore, let's be honest. This video is just as much of an illusion. These words are just noise inside the film. They explain nothing because truth cannot be packaged into a result or a thought. You do not need to try to capture this emptiness. You do not need to search for the source using perception because perception is already the consequence. All that remains when absolutely all concepts fall away, even the concept of awakening, is simply life. Just this second. The smell of coffee, the noise of cars outside the window, a breath. not as a result of a spiritual search, but simply as the only thing that is, before the mind has managed to name it somehow. There is no one else here, and there never was. If this landed, if something in here cracked something open, the Prodigal Movement was built for exactly this moment. We are not a church. We are not a doctrine. We are a community of people done being managed by systems that profit from their smallness. Subscribe, follow, come find us. The link is in the description. The game is real, but you are not the character. Take your power back.